standing next to a fireman. He said, yeah, they just bombed the Pentagon, too.
Our colleague, Jeff Green, well, we have a little more sound here from witnesses.
I'm with the fire alarm company. The doorman goes to me, wow, I never seen a plane flying so low. And we looked out at it, all of a sudden, boom, it seemed like it wasn't even real. And we came running over here closer to the place, and all of a sudden we saw the other explosion. I don't know. Get down! What's happening? She's afraid of another explosion! Down! My man! Move it! Come on! Move it back up!
I was in B tower. A tower.
What floor were you on?
B1.
What floor?
The first one.
What happened? Tell me.
When a big explosion happened, some guy came out. His skin was all off. I helped him out. This is him all over. There's people jumping out of windows. I've seen at least 14 people jumping out of windows. It's horrific. I can't believe this is happening.
Anything else that you saw? Were you there for the second hit by the plane?
About 10 minutes later, the second building went off.
Did you see it?
Yes, I saw it. It just blew up. A big explosion. People started running. It was just chaos everywhere. Yes, I was right there. I was down in the basement. Came down. All of a sudden, the elevator blew up. Smoke. I dragged the guy out. His skin was hanging off, and I dragged him out, and I helped him out to the ambulance.
The words of some of the witnesses here in Manhattan this morning, and the pictures of what will, I suspect, before this is over, go down as one of the most horrific days in our lifetime. We're joined by our colleague, CNN's Jeff Greenfield.
Aaron, you know what? In 1993, when terrorists bombed the World Trade Center, their plan was to knock one of the towers into the other, bringing them both down. That disaster was averted, and bad as that was, in a sense, America was lucky. Another terrorist attack in the planning was interrupted to blow up the Lincoln Tunnel and submerge dozens, maybe hundreds of people. At the eve of the millennium, a suspected terrorist, was intercepted, you remember, at the Canadian border on his way to Seattle. And I know that not so long ago, former President Clinton, in a private talk to a group, ruminated on how lucky the United States has been over the years with the combination of luck and the skill of anti-terrorist people to avoid such things. What we are seeing now is nothing less than the worst nightmare that one could imagine come to life, probably worse than anyone could have imagined. You may remember that Tom Clancy wrote a novel that ends with a terrorist hijacker crashing into the Capitol. The worst act of terrorist violence on American soil, the Oklahoma City bombing, killed fewer than 200 people. All we know today is that tens of thousands of people worked in that complex that has been destroyed. And I hate to say it this way, but this may be the day that America's luck ran out.
Well, it is hard, isn't it? I mean, you look out here, and you see the Statue of Liberty to the right, and these buildings off to the left, the attacks on Washington. We don't know a lot about who's behind this or what this is all about, but the symbolism of these attacks is extraordinary. CNN's David Ensor is in Washington, and he joins us. David?
Aaron, I'm talking to U.S. officials who are obviously working on who is responsible for this. Their working thesis is that this is overseas terrorism, not domestic. They say they cannot rule out additional attacks yet to come. In terms of claims of responsibility so far, there is an Agence France-Presse report in which a group with the word Palestine in the name claims responsibility. There is also a report quoting personnel close to Osama bin Laden, the fugitive Saudi accused terrorist, denying that that group was involved. But again, U.S. officials say they can't shed any light on whether these reports are correct or incorrect. Usually when this kind of attack occurs, you have claims of responsibility from all sorts of people who had nothing to do with it. So it's a very fluid situation at this point. But the The Central Intelligence Agency of the United States has been evacuated from its headquarters in Langley, Virginia. There are some key personnel still in the headquarters, but the operations center has been moved elsewhere. U.S. officials saying they don't want to talk about where exactly the headquarters staff and operations staff has been moved to. But that staff is focusing now on trying to find any shred of information that could help the U.S. government figure out who is doing this and how to put a stop to it. Aaron?
David, you tell me if I'm right or wrong here. As a practical matter, there are not a whole lot of groups that the United States government knows about that are sophisticated enough, have the kind of money, the resources to pull off something like this. Fair enough?
That's absolutely true, and obviously, despite the denial, attention will quickly turn to the bin Laden group because it has long tentacles. It has connections with all sorts of other groups. We saw at the Millennium a group
stories of miracles as we go through all of this, and those people who were in that building, and after the first explosion happened and the first crash happened, word of people who got out. I was listening on the radio, broadcasting live just about an hour ago, to a woman who was in the second tower to be hit. She was able to walk down 92 floors in what she described to be a pretty controlled situation. 92 floors down the west tower of the building. She was able to walk without any chaos to give a radio report live. It's my understanding that literally thousands of people in the time before the two towers collapsed were able to make their way away from that area. Mass transit was certainly down at the time, but it's a quick walk to get out of that area. They had, what, a good 45 minutes, Ann Woolsey, to begin to make their way to the north. In Midtown right now, I was looking over this building and down into, in fact, I'm doing so right now. I'm looking down onto 47th Street, right below us. This to my right here, no, you don't have to, you can't see it from there, I don't believe. Maybe you can see Times Square over here. You can't. This is Times Square right below me. This is a scene right now at 11:15 in the morning, at 11:15, when this would be a sea of tourists on a spectacular day in Manhattan, and instead sirens echo across Manhattan, and that is the TKTS stand. I believe you're looking at that now. You're not able to see that, are you? The TKTS stand, can you see it on the lens? We can't. Pan back down to where the World Trade Center
numb
was.
shock all over this city and all across America. If you're watching us now, you're looking at the lower end of Manhattan where the World Trade Center once stood. It is gone this morning, obliterated after two strikes in coordinated attacks from airliners, one of them apparently hijacked from American Airlines. We are going to be getting a news conference from American Airlines in about 15 minutes. In the meantime, an Arabic newspaper, a fairly authoritative source, the editor of that London-based newspaper, says bin Laden, Osama bin Laden, the Saudi-born, now exiled to Afghanistan rebel leader, Osama bin Laden, according to this newspaper editor, warned 3 weeks ago that he would attack American interests, and he promised a very big one. Now, we cannot yet attribute this to Osama bin Laden. However, that was the promise from this fairly authoritative London newspaper.
Well, John, certainly sources that I have talked to this morning, terrorist experts say this has the signature of Osama bin Laden, that he has the money, the network, the ability to carry out this type of coordinated attack. And let me point out that in the East African bombing terrorist trial here in New York City of the bombing of the two embassies in East Africa, that 3 of the alleged co-conspirators, one is now in jail, 2 are in jail, one's in jail, 2 cooperated for the United States government at the trial. They had pilot's licenses, and they can fly airplanes. So I'm sure investigators right now are trying to figure out a possible scenario. Were these planes hijacked by bin Laden people? Did they rush up to the cockpit? You don't need a gun. You can use burst in, several of them, and strangle the pilots or something, and then take over the controls of an airplane near the last minute while you're flying, and divert the plane and smash it right into the World Trade Center towers or in the Pentagon. Clearly, that is a scenario that I would think that investigators are trying to go on right now to try and figure out exactly what happened, who was responsible for this horrible act. And I also think that we have now entered a new era, clearly a day of infamy, that we are not, in this country, clearly immune.
September 11th, 2001. You're going to remember this day for a long time, and a lot of things in this country will change as a result of what you're seeing on your screen now. Not all of the chaos, perhaps the worst of it in terms of loss of life, but not all of the chaos is taking place in Manhattan. Washington, D.C. also has been under attack. U.S. airplane apparently hijacked as well, slamming into the outside wall of the outer ring of the Pentagon. Our David Schuster is there and has an update for us. David?
John, we have the eyewitnesses describing it as a U.S. airplane at approximately 9:40 this morning, approaching National Airport from a strange approach. The eyewitnesses claiming that it then slammed into the south side of the Pentagon. We've just spoken with a U.S. Air spokesperson, Rick Weintraub, who says that all of their aircraft, commercial aircraft, have been accounted for, and says that they are unaware of any one of their planes involved in this incident. So this may be a case of an eyewitness misreading the markings on the plane, but we can confirm for you that there is a large gaping 50-foot hole on the E-ring of the south side of the Pentagon near the helipad. We're getting reports from the Arlington, formerly Arlington Hospital, which is now an Ananova Hospital, that injured are being taken there. The Pentagon has been evacuated. The smoke is still pretty thick here in the Pentagon, even on our side, the north side of the Pentagon, and most of the 23,000 employees here at the Pentagon have been evacuated. But again, we do not have confirmation on the which commercial airliner may have been involved in this particular incident at the Pentagon. U.S. Air says that it was not one of their aircraft, that perhaps the red markings that an eyewitness saw might belong to American or Southwest, or American or one of the commuter airlines that fly in a national airport, which is just a few miles away. But again, we are confirming that an counterintelligence source is confirming that it was a commercial aircraft that slammed into the Pentagon this morning. There's no indication yet on the number of injuries or those killed. Some initial reports are that some Arlington hospitals are being flooded with injuries. There were dozens of fire trucks and ambulances that were streaking towards the Pentagon at approximately 9:45 this morning, and most of the employees here heading out of the building, and most of them are in fact now gone. But you can hear the sirens still throughout the Pentagon hallways. Smoke still pretty thick here on this north side. It is worth noting, though, that perhaps this incident could have been worse. There are five concentric rings on the Pentagon, and the one that was struck on the south side by the helipad, which is where officials land their helicopters and whatnot, is the E-ring, and apparently there's a large gaping hole. This particular ring is sort of the offices of senior military personnel, but again, no indications about the number of injuries, the number of killed, but one would presume that if the eyewitnesses were correct, and there's several eyewitnesses of some type of commercial aircraft, perhaps as large as a 737, that there would be numerous fatalities involved in this incident, and still the aftermath still being felt here at the Pentagon. The entire area shut down. Traffic has been blocked on 395 and 110, the main highways near the Pentagon, and smoke is still pretty thick coming out of the Pentagon at this hour. John?
David, you mentioned that eyewitness report that called it a U.S. airplane, and as you noted, U.S. Air is saying their plane was not involved. Now, we are just...
As one person told me who works in the hospital, this will test the mettle of everyone who works here.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And to recap, as far as he's concerned, Bellevue Hospital is reporting 30 minor injuries, 5 major, 1 DOA. We're going to go to Whitney Casey in just a moment, but first let's take it to Todd McDermott, who's got an update for us in our information center. Todd?
Lisa, as best as I can tell, the latest reports say that this plane that we talked about near Camp David was actually forced down by U.S. Air Force aircraft. It is believed that aircraft was on target for another attack on the Pentagon. Again, a second attack on the Pentagon. We have heard, you just heard, there may be heavy loss of life at the Pentagon, but our latest report is that the Air Force did force down yet another plane near or at Camp David that was targeting the Pentagon. Also, a report from CBS News that just 3 weeks ago, Osama bin Laden, the most wanted terrorist in the world, had promised an unprecedented attack on U.S. interests because of this country's support for the nation of Israel. Again, that was just 3 weeks ago. That report coming out of London from CBS News. Again, we're trying to keep track here of the number of airplanes in the sky. We do know that the American Airlines is now saying they have lost contact with 2 more flights. 2 more flights that may have been hijacked. They have lost contact with the pilots on both those planes, and we'll get more information as soon as we can. Lisa, Michael, back to you.
All right, Todd, thank you very much for clarifying that. One quick note as we prepare to go to Whitney Casey, who's over at St. Vincent's. We have received word that that entire area, Lower Manhattan, being evacuated and locked down because of now a fear of gas leaks, which would certainly follow suit in an instance like that. Let's go now to Whitney Casey, standing by at St. Vincent's Hospital. Whitney, what can you tell us?
Well, right now we've got the count at 152. St. Vincent's here has 800 beds. Right now joining us is Mark Ackerman. Mark, you said that you guys are in a desperate situation for blood right now. You have 200 people lined up to donate blood.
Yes, one of the challenges that all of the trauma centers are facing right now is blood. We certainly have enough blood at the moment, but considering the numbers of patients that are coming to us and the speed at which they are coming to us, we know we're going to need blood. There are blood centers being set up around the city, and we encourage all New Yorkers to please go donate blood.
So you said 152. What kind of injuries?
Currently, we've had a wide range of injuries from broken bones, smoke inhalation, a number of burns, and some relatively minor injuries. But they're getting more serious now as the time goes on.
Now, I've seen there aren't a lot of ambulances that are coming through here right now. That's because you guys have some triage set up?
Right. We have 2 triage teams set up now downtown. They are triaging the patients with EMS to the appropriate facilities all around the city. Being a trauma center, we will now begin to get the most severely injured patients here and at Bellevue.
Now, you said there's a number that people can call to find out if their family members, how they're doing, if they are here at St. Vincent's. What is that number?
Correct. The correct number here at St. Vincent's in Manhattan is 212-604-7285.
Thank you so much, Mark, for talking with us. Now, we do have some information on where you can go donate blood because they are saying here they are in a desperate situation right now. 200 people lined up here at St. Vincent's. There is a place at Citicorp, 310 East 67th between 1st and 2nd. You can also go to the Red Cross on 150 Amsterdam at 67th. Columbia Presbyterian. There are also a couple places in the 5 boroughs. They say that all the hospitals in the boroughs are opening up to donate blood. That is the most important thing right now. If you can, you need to get out and donate blood. As they said right here, they have enough blood, but they say that in the next hour or 2 hours, they will be in a desperate situation. Right now, 152 people here at St. Vincent's reporting live. Whitney Casey, CBS 2.
Okay, Whitney, thanks for that report. We'll check in with you in just a few minutes.
We're awaiting a press conference, by the way, from American Airlines. Should be coming up here shortly, but in the meantime, they have issued a statement saying only that they have lost 2 aircraft carrying 156 people.
And we heard from Mayor Giuliani just a few moments ago. He issued a statement anyway, and he said, quote, "I have a sense it's a horrendous number of lives lost."
Michael O'Looney joining us now with a recap of just what's happened today. Michael.
Yeah, Michael, a recap of today's horrific events. Shortly before 9 a.m., a plane crashed into the World Trade Center. That plane, American Airlines Flight 11, was hijacked from Boston. It was headed for Los Angeles. About 2 minutes after that first crash, around 9:15, another plane smashed into the second World Trade Center tower. There are reports that that plane took off from Newark Airport. About 30 minutes later, at 9:45, an airline crashed near the Pentagon just outside of Washington, D.C. Then around 10 a.m., the first tower, Tower 1 of the World Trade Center, collapsed to the ground. At about the same time, a large plane crashed in western Pennsylvania, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. About 20 minutes later, around 10:20, the State Department was evacuated due to reports of a car bomb. And at 10:30, the second tower of the World Trade Center also collapsed. About 8 minutes later, there was a fourth explosion at the World Trade Center. Since then, the White House, the State Department, the United Nations, and the Sears Tower in Chicago have all been evacuated. Terrorist precautions have been put in effect all across the country. Monuments and museums in Washington, D.C. are closed. All air traffic has been halted nationwide. Here in New York, today's primary elections for mayor have been canceled, and the SEC has been closed. All the financial markets shut down. Subway service in New York is stopped, as well as a number of other commuter bus and train lines. That's the latest.
All right, thank you, Michael, for that report. Let's go to Cindy Hsu. She's been in our newsroom all morning long. She's got an update for us as well. Cindy.
Okay, we're getting more updates on the actual planes involved in these crashes. Number one, American Airlines says it has lost 2 aircraft carrying 156 people. Again, American Airlines, and we had mentioned that the first plane was the American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to L.A. We're also hearing from United that it is missing 2 planes. One of them is Flight 93, which is from Newark to San Francisco. Again, United Flight 93 is missing from Newark to San Francisco. We're also getting word from the emergency rooms at NYU Downtown Hospital, and we're hearing that the victims are telling doctors that people were falling off buildings and that they were seeing death all around them. And very quickly, I just want to go over what is closed in the area once again, and that is the Lincoln Tunnel, the Holland Tunnel, the GW Bridge, all airports, the Queens Midtown Tunnel in Manhattan, the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel in Manhattan. All subways are now closed. The Empire State Building and all other landmarks. The SEC has closed all financial markets today, and New York City public libraries are closed. And again, we are waiting to hear from American Airlines. A press conference they're supposed to have after 11:30, and they should have a lot to say since it was one of their planes that hit the First World Trade Center. And one other information we're getting from the phone company is do not use the phone unless it is dire emergency, because once again, people are having a really hard time getting through as they try to find, you know, friends or family that were in the lower Manhattan area, or even students in classes. And we have said that the schools are in a lockdown, although some of the students are being moved to other schools where parents can pick them up. And I can quickly go over those schools with you. Again, it's PS 89 and PS 234, and those kids are at PS 41 now, and that's at 116 West 11th. Kids from PS 150 are now at PS 3, and that's at Christopher and Hudson, and that's where parents can pick up the students. Michael and Lisa?
All right, Cindy, it's actually Todd McDermott and Angela Ray joining in now. If you are just joining us, we want to recap what has happened today. Again, it has been a terrible 2.5 hours in the lives of all Americans. Shortly before 9 o'clock this morning, a plane crashed into the World Trade Center. That plane, American Airlines Flight 11, was hijacked from Boston. It was headed for Los Angeles. About 2 minutes after the first crash, around 9:15, another plane smashed into the other tower of the World Trade Center.
Now, there are reports that the plane took off from Newark Airport. That has not been confirmed yet, though. About 30 minutes later, at around 9:45, an airplane crashed near the Pentagon, just outside Washington, D.C., in Northern Virginia. Around 10 a.m., the first tower of the World Trade Center collapsed to the ground. It was quite a sight to see. And at about the same time, a large plane crashed in western Pennsylvania, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh.
Now, about 20 minutes later, around 10:20, the State Department was evacuated due to reports of a car bomb. Again, though, senior law enforcement officials tell CBS News that did not happen. We'll try to get more information on that for you. We do want to break in as we recap for you that Newark Airport has been evacuated. Again, Newark Airport has just been evacuated. As you know, airports across the United States have been shut down. All air travel has been stopped. We do also want to tell you about the plane that was forced down near Camp David. There was an attack on the Pentagon. We do have confirmation now that a second plane that was due apparently to attack the Pentagon was forced down by F-16 fighters. Let's go back to recapping what happened this morning. Earlier, the second tower of the World Trade Center collapsing. About 8 minutes after that, a fourth explosion at the World Trade Center, perhaps at the base of the building. Now, since then, the White House, the State Department, the United Nations here in New York, the Sears Tower in Chicago, all evacuated. Terrorist precautions have been put into effect all around the country. Monuments and museums, as you might expect, in Washington are closed.
All air traffic has been halted, as Todd mentioned earlier. Any airplane, as a matter, any aircraft that was in the air was being told to land at the nearest airport immediately, if not sooner. Also, the SEC has closed all financial market subway service in New York is stopped, as well as a number of other commuter bus and train lines. The president came out at about 9:30. He's in Sarasota, Florida. He was actually talking to some kids there, and he said that this is obviously an apparent terrorist attack on the United States.
Again, at that time, since that time, much more information has come in. We should point out as well that not only has no one taken responsibility for these attacks, but we are still in full attack mode, attack alert mode throughout the United States, anticipating perhaps more attacks. As many as 8 planes may have been hijacked today. We do not have, the FAA does not have contact with all those planes. At least 4 are accounted for. We have two that struck the World Trade Center, one that crashed in western Pennsylvania, and one that was forced down by U.S. Air Force fighter jets near Camp David. Again, that plane apparently was on its way to launch yet another attack at the Pentagon. We do believe there are significant casualties at the Pentagon. It has been evacuated.
Now, the first plane that crashed into the World Trade Center was an American Airlines flight. We are expecting to hear from American Airlines at any moment. We will bring you that press conference live. Mayor Giuliani has had very little to say other than this is obviously a great tragedy.
Angela, I want to go right now to Cindy Hsu in the newsroom with an update for us. Cindy.
Todd, we have some very grim numbers right now. American Airlines is reporting that 164 passengers and crew are dead. Again, American Airlines reporting 164 passengers and crew dead. And we're dealing with two different flights, American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to LA and American Airlines Flight 77 from Dulles to LA. Also, United Airlines confirms the flight from Newark to New Jersey to San Francisco crashed near Pittsburgh. We are waiting to hear more from American, and United Airlines was the other plane, the other carrier that was involved with getting their planes hijacked, and there are two flights that are United.
All right, Cindy, thank you very much.
Now, we understand there was major loss of life at the Pentagon with that explosion.
We do know that President Bush was in Florida this morning. He abruptly cut his trip short in order, we think, to fly back to Washington. And General Clark, while you are with us, what would the plans be for the president in this situation?
More information at this time.
Mike, if I could just interrupt you, the big question at the moment is where Flight 77, the flight from Washington Dulles to Los Angeles, is. Is there any reason to suspect that it was the plane that crashed 80 miles south of Pittsburgh today?
That has not been confirmed at all. All they are confirming right now are the two flights and no further information. They've been very tight-lipped. There are a few workers from American Airlines down here and reluctant to confirm anything at this point.
Well, actually, Mike, I've just been corrected by a producer who suggests that the plane that crashed 80 miles south of Pittsburgh was actually a United Airlines flight. And that indeed, that still leaves question, because we know that the flight that crashed into the Pentagon, and we don't want to forget what happened in Washington today, where another plane, a 737, crashed in, causing partial collapse of the Pentagon, was a U.S. air flight. So again, that leaves the question, where is Flight 77?
Yeah, and at this point, all they're saying, they're confirming that they lost two aircraft. And there are no specific details in their statement about where the aircraft went.
All right, Mike, if you could please stay on the story for us, covering events as they transpire from headquarters from American Airlines in Dallas. Again, they've released a written statement that two planes have gone down, a 767 and a 757. We can account for the 767 in the most awful way, as you'll see in just moments. That 767 en route from Boston to Los Angeles. There you can see the black silhouette, the explosion, the flames, the destruction wreaked on the World Trade Center tower and on those below as that plane, Flight 11 from Boston to LA, crashed into the World Trade Center, causing much more destruction inside the World Trade Center and on the streets below. I now bring in Neil Cavuto, who is our business editor and responsible for a lot of our coverage here. And Neil, these are situations for which it's hard to find any words except infamy, devastation, wholesale slaughter, and heinous crime.
And really, as you pointed out before, Dave, in the heart of the financial community, 5 brokerage houses, including Morgan Stanley, Dean Witter, and American Express, have offices housed in these twin towers. Much of the world's trading in the dollar, in some of the precious metals, are done in those two buildings, or were done in those two buildings. So if you're trying to strike a damaging, lethal blow to the financial community, this is the place you hit. Many a day as a reporter did I climb these two towers and talk to various financial analysts, stock traders, that sort of thing. And even in the neighboring buildings, when these two towers tumbled, you have to be aware there are a lot of minor tertiary firms, financial firms, many of whom we've been trying to contact just to see if everyone's all right, and we've been unable to do that. Also, for the first time in history, all the major exchanges on the planet are closed. They were looking at a delayed opening on the New York Stock Exchange. They've forgotten that altogether. They're not going to do that. Global trading has stopped essentially between the two continents of Europe and the United States. First time in history that has happened. So if you're trying to really deal a death blow to the United States financial community, as well as the quite literal death blow you've dealt with in the downtown parts of Manhattan today, this was the place to attack, and this was the place to do the devastation. That, of course, is Times Square we were looking at there, where also some brokerage houses are located. But I can't stress enough what this means on a symbolic level, just to be really just a few blocks away from the corner of Wall and Broad, of course, where trading it was to have commenced today. Of course, that's been called off entirely. No indications when it would ensue.
Everything began to rain down. It was pitch black around us as the winds were whipping through the court.
All right, apparently Marcia's microphone is still not working. We want to let you know again, as you can watch the bottom of your screen there, you will see various facts coming to you. Again, the latest from the mayor is he has a sense. This is a quote from Mayor Giuliani. Quote, "I have a sense it is a horrendous number of lives lost." Again, unnamed sources within the police department telling us that it appears thousands of lives may have been lost.
Okay, I have some updated news here. United Airlines Flight 93, that's a Boeing 757. It was en route to San Francisco. It crashed 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. About 10 a.m. United Airlines, right? United Airlines is very concerned at this point about Flight 175. That's a Boeing 67 from Boston to Los Angeles. That Boston to Los Angeles flight path. This is the second plane that was heading in that flight path direction. Marcia, are you ready?
Yeah, what I was going to tell you, I'm going to try to tell you again, is that it's beginning to look more and more as if this was a well-planned out attack on all major installations in New York and in Washington. We're now told, CBS 2 has now learned, that the plane that crashed outside Pittsburgh was actually en route to crash and attack Camp David, the presidential retreat. So to recap, there are still 4 unaccounted for planes. There are 4 unaccounted for planes. There's one in Dallas that has been surrounded by F-16s. There are 3 others that we're still trying to locate. But the 4th plane that we know about that crashed was actually targeting Camp David, the presidential retreat.
All right, Marcia, thank you. Also, there's been a lot of speculation, and will be for some time, about who takes responsibility for this. I want to read you a quote from a man who is employed at Jane's Transport in London. Jane's, of course, a worldwide leader in expertise as far as military aircraft, in fact, all aircraft. This quote is, "This is perhaps the most audacious terrorist attack that has ever taken place in the world." This man's name is Chris Yates. "It takes a logistics operation from the terror group involved that is second to none. Only a very small handful of terror groups on that list. The name at the top, Osama bin Laden." Also, President Bush, as you know, perhaps you saw earlier today live on national television, promising a full-scale hunt for those who committed this act of terrorism. And again, the president, hours ago, did call this an act of terrorism. There was some speculation in the minutes following the first impact on the World Trade Center. Perhaps this was something else, an air disaster of some kind. From there, apparently, when we saw the second attack, it was clear.
Very obvious.
It seemed clear it was a terrorist attack. Since that time, we know that another bomb was set off at the World Trade Center. And if you are just tuning in, you will see there is no more World Trade Center. Both towers have collapsed.
I think what is incredulous and what a lot of us are just having a hard time understanding is how could this country, with our intelligence and counterintelligence, how could this get by us? How could something of this magnitude happen? Certainly answers, this question is going to take a while to get answers to this question.
CBS News reporting that just 3 weeks ago, Osama bin Laden himself promised an unprecedented attack on U.S. interests. Again, and the World Trade Center, obviously a symbol of America throughout the world. And those pictures of the 1993 attack on the World Trade Center, that bombing, are etched in our minds, but are really dwarfed into what we're seeing now. The World Trade Center is gone. The towers are gone.
As I mentioned, President Bush spoke about 9:30 in Sarasota, Florida. We want to show you that tape now.
Difficult moment for America. I, unfortunately, will be going back to Washington after my remarks. Secretary Rod Page and Lieutenant Governor will take the podium and discuss education. I do want to thank the folks here at Booker Elementary School for their hospitality. Today, we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand. And now, if you join me in a moment of silence. May God bless the victims, their families, and America. Thank you very much.
President Bush speaking earlier today around 9:30 in Sarasota, Florida. He had been talking to some students there when he learned about what happened here in New York City at around 9 o'clock. One plane crashed into the World Trade Center. Some minutes later, a second plane did. That first plane was an American Airlines flight from Boston to L.A. It had been hijacked. And the spiral of events after that just keep on going on and on and on.
It's hard to imagine something in the lives of Americans that parallels what we are witnessing today.
Yeah.
We are still, it appears, under the threat of a terrorist attack at this time. The U.S. military is in the air. All flying has been shut down across the country. I should also point out now that New York State borders with Canada have now been closed. And authorities have gone on alert from coast to coast, halting all air traffic, as I said, evacuating all high-profile buildings and tightening security at strategic facilities following the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Evacuations were ordered earlier this morning at the United Nations building in New York, the Sears Tower in Chicago, and the tallest skyscrapers in Boston, Cleveland, and Minneapolis. Seattle's landmark Space Needle was also closed this morning. Again, in many ways, we don't know how this will turn out because it does not appear to be over yet. We have lost the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. Yeah. We have lost the Pentagon. It appears we may be faced with massive loss of life at both the Pentagon and here in New York at the World Trade Center. And again, at this point, it appears there are other planes in the sky unaccounted for that may be able to launch another attack, although the U.S. Air Force is in the sky.
We're going to take it back to Cindy Hsu in the newsroom. She has an update for us. Cindy.
Okay, CNN is quoting the AP saying that Islamic Jihad movement says the attacks are related to the conflict in the Mideast. And we are also hearing from the AP that 3,000 Palestinians are in the city of Nablus chanting, "God is good." Now, locally, I wanted to give you a number because obviously there's a lot of concern over the 156 people who were aboard the 2 American Airlines flights. Relatives should call the Americans' response number, and that number is 1-800-245-0999. Again, anyone who had relatives on these American Airlines flights, that number is 1-800-245-0999. And again, we're talking about Flight 77 from Washington Dulles to Los Angeles, Flight 77 from Dulles to Los Angeles with 58 passengers aboard, and Flight 11, which is a 767 from Boston to Los Angeles, Flight 11, and that one had 81 passengers, 9 flight attendants, and 2 pilots on board. Todd, Angela?
All right,
Okay,
Cindy,
thanks,
thank you.
Cindy. If you can see the left-hand corner of the screen there, you're looking at all of the damage and the soot. I've seen some video of people walking around, and it looked almost like it was snowing. They were just covered with white soot. And just the remarkable thing is, as these explosions are happening, people are trying to save their own lives by literally jumping out of these windows in the World Trade Center. It's just the most incredible tragedy we've seen in our lifetime.
We have reports of 10,000 emergency workers from the city of New York converging on the area around the World Trade Center to try to save lives. Again, it is unclear how many people have been killed. The first confirmed death at 11:15 this morning, just over a half hour ago. Many, many more are expected. Also, we have reports now that 3,000 people are in the streets of Nablus right now celebrating what is happening in the U.S. While we do have some there is still some speculation. No one has taken full responsibility for the attacks. There is speculation this has to do with the U.S. government support of Israel. On the West Bank, though, thousands of Palestinians are celebrating the attacks, even as Yasser Arafat has been quoted as saying he is horrified by what has happened. And as I pointed out just a few moments ago, Osama bin Laden promising an attack on U.S. interests just 3 weeks ago.
Okay, we have someone live on the phone with us now, Scott Nezzo. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your last name. He's in at the World Trade Center. Scott, what can you tell us?
This morning I was on the 81st floor of One World Trade Center. We heard an explosion. The building swayed. There was debris that was falling that was visible outside our window at a Southern Exposure office. We immediately ran out to the stairwell. We went down about 4 flights. Thick black smoke was in the stairwell. We turned around and came back up to the 81st floor. We evacuated the floor. We made it to the other stairwell, and it took us about an hour to go down the 81 stories. While we were going down, firemen were passing us going up. They were stopping approximately every 10 or 20 stories. Given the heat of the stairwell and the amount of gear that they were wearing. Burn victims were also being passed down as they were making it down. Fortunately, we did have electricity and there was good air in the stairwell, and we exited through the concourse at the bottom of the building. There were tons of emergency personnel from the DEA to the FBI to the police and firemen leading us out. The concourse level, the elevator banks were collapsed. The stainless steel doors were caved in. The marble panels in the elevator bank and the main lobby floor were falling off the walls. There was about 6 inches of water on the floor in the lobby. And as we exited out the building, we exited to Church Street. I was out for approximately 30 seconds right next to the Century 21. We heard a crackling, and that's when the first tower crashed down. There was a stampede of people that were running away from the towers. There was a cloud of white debris and smoke that was, if you will, chasing us as we were going down the street. We ducked into a building. We would then realize that we may be in line for the second building if it was going to fall. We exited that building. I made it to the Brooklyn Bridge, and at that point heard the same crackling, turned around, and that's when the first World Trade Center building fell.
My goodness, Scott, how many people were with you? You keep saying we, a pack of 10, or how many?
The stairwell, as far as you could see, was packed with people.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone on my floor, approximately 120 people, were evacuated, and they were in the stairwell. I was one of the last people on my floor to leave. Just the stairwell was people backed up to people for as far as you could see down.
Scott, I'm struck by how matter-of-fact, and I'm sure you are in shock right now about what's happened. Can you take us into the building, into that stairwell, in the moments following the impact, and tell me what were people doing, what was going through your mind?
Immediately after the impact, we went out to get to the stairwell. The carpeting on my floor was on fire. There were people screaming from what appeared to be the elevator bank. When we went to the first stairwell, there was commotion. People were running as hard as they could going down, but they reached a point and someone made the good choice of, there's just too much smoke, we're not going to run through this. And that's when we turned around and came back upstairs. People at that point, their faces were covered with the black smoke. Someone had called, actually, one of the people on my floor, someone had called her relative who actually used to work for the MTA and said, the only concern you have is the smoke. These buildings are not going to collapse.
Oh.
So the great news was there was not panic in the stairwell as we were exiting the building. The lights were on. The firemen were very helpful. They were cheering people on. They actually used their axes to break open the vending machines and passed out the water and the juices and whatever it was. It was very hot in the stairwell, but fortunately the lights were on and the air quality was pretty good.
So as far as you know, everyone on your floor made it out okay?
As far as I know, yes.
Scott, we're very happy that you talked with us, and we're very happy that you're doing okay and that the people on your floor made it out. You are very calm. I can honestly say, if I were in your shoes, I would not be as calm as you are, but we wish you the very best.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. I think it goes without saying that certainly someone in Scott's position, but perhaps all of us right now are running on automatic.
Yes.
This is a numbing, terrifying event, in all of our lives,
Yes.
let alone the people who may have lost loved ones in the World Trade Center or on board many of these flights. Again, we have as many as 4 planes down, 3 confirmed, including the one in Pennsylvania.
Let's get that number out again. If you think you have relatives or a friend or someone on an American Airlines flight.
These sort of devastating but smaller kind of hit and miss attacks that we've seen over the last 7-8 years.
Well, you don't ordinarily expect terrorists to display this degree of expertise. Flying an airplane is not all that easy. Kidnapping or hijacking an airplane, particularly with the safeguards we have at the airports right now, is not a trivial exercise. But unfortunately, the security you have at airports is not perfect because nothing human beings do is perfect. Somebody thought very carefully and hard and long about this, and then they got some madmen to actually take control of the aircraft.
Tom, stay with me for a second. We a few moments ago told our viewers that United Airlines was concerned about another. United lost a flight near Pittsburgh earlier today, and officials said they were also concerned about United Flight 175, Boston to Los Angeles. And now we have reports that concern was justified. A second plane has gone down, United Flight 175. Again, that was from Boston to LA. And as you look at the Pentagon, which was also hit by a plane earlier in the day. Jeff?
Yes, Tom, you were mentioning that this is such a rare act, and yet we now know of at least 4 commercial airliners that apparently were hijacked and either crashed or crashed into buildings, causing death and havoc of an unimaginable scale. So whoever is behind this is of a dimension that literally dwarfs even fantasy.
Pretty much. I dreamed pretty big with my dreams, and fortunately or unfortunately, didn't get quite this large. It's not, generally speaking, it's not credible to think that you're going to find more than one person who's willing to do something like this.
Hey, Tom, Jeff, all of you on the line here, it is fair to say that what we know is that this is an extraordinary. I think it's fair to say, Jeff, it is beyond anything any of us could possibly have imagined. I think that those of us who dealt with Oklahoma City, those of us who dealt with the Trade Center here in '93, as we both did, you say, that is awful what happened. And you look at what appears to be playing out today, and we have no idea yet what the loss of life will be, certainly in the hundreds. We know that hospitals here in New York are overwhelmed with people being brought there all over the city of New York and beyond.
The only piece of news that is the least bit, I guess, reassuring is that there is no report of any kind of chemical result. That is, the folks on the ground around the World Trade Center, the rescue crews, the survivors, there is absolutely no indication at this moment that there was any kind of bioterrorism involved. Not that what happened here isn't horrific enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just add on again, small, medium-sized pieces of information as we go. All airlines in the country are closed down. All airports in the country are closed down. We now are being told that the U.S.-Mexican border has been sealed. We don't know if that is just simply part of a plan that the government puts into effect under a worst-case circumstance. This is certainly that, or if there is some specific reason why a decision was made to shut down that border. Our senior White House correspondent, John King, on the phone. John. John? John King, can you hear me? It's Aaron.
I hear you, Aaron.
What have you got to report for us?
Aaron, I'm standing across from the White House. I'm told by Secret Service and administration sources that all of the principals, all of the protectees, meaning the President, the Vice President, the First Lady, and Mrs. Cheney, are safe. They do not want us disclosing their locations But I am told by a senior administration official that the plan and the priority is to get President Bush back to the White House as soon as they believe it is safe. Now, there are both operational and political reasons for wanting to do that. The White House Situation Room, in the view of White House officials, is the best place from which to monitor events and direct any operations. And that is a fortified structure within the White House compound where we know the Vice President was when everyone else was evacuated from the premises earlier. Again, the Secret Service does not want to confirm for us for security reasons, or administration officials the same, tell us where those people are now, although I was told a short time ago the Vice President is still in a position to be monitoring and directing the response to these developments, and that the President, who is en route back to Washington, we're told Andrews Air Force Base is on full alert. I was also told that there are extra precautions that were taken to ensure the President's flight back to Washington was a safe one. Now, you can read into that additional fighter jet escorts, Air Force One always has some escorts with it, that additional fighter jet escorts were put up for that. Now, the political reason they want to get the President back to the White House is rather obvious. The White House believes this has been a tragic terrorist attack, and they want to send the signal that the President is back on the job at the White House. Priority one, though, officials say, is to guarantee that he can be safely brought back to the White House. And in the past half hour or so, we have seen security precautions on the street, checks being taken out on the street, on the grounds around the White House. There are snipers up on the roofs of the White House itself, including buildings around it. And a military helicopter gunship flew over the premises not that long ago, about 15 minutes ago now, and then it circled back over toward the Pentagon, where from my location you can still see smoke coming into the sky from there. But we are told the Vice President is still in a position to monitor all this as the President makes his way back.
John, thank you. Our senior White House correspondent, John King. As John mentioned, the President was in Sarasota, Florida, making his way back to Washington. Whether he'll be taken directly to the White House or not is a little bit unclear. Secret Service wants to make sure the building is safe. It is, I would add, one other symbolic reason why you would want to get the President in the White House, and that's to send a message to who's ever responsible for this, that yes, you've caused extraordinary damage and a great deal of tragedy here, but what you haven't done is shut down the American government. The President will want to get home. Governor George Pataki of New York joins us on the telephone. Governor, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm here.
What are you hearing from the Trade Center area itself?
Well, we're still hearing that it's a horrific situation. We're in desperate need of people to help out with emergency services. The city team is there, but we've activated our National Guard and our statewide fire and emergency services, and we're going to be bringing those in to relieve the city forces as the afternoon goes on. I've been in touch with the mayor, I've been in touch with the White House, and everything that we can do and everything that can be done is being done at this point.
Has anyone given you any idea of how many injured we are dealing with down in
Not
the
at
Trade
this
Center?
point. At this point, the sole goal is to try to help as many people as possible, to get them to the emergency services, to get them the care they need, to help people who want to leave the area to leave in an orderly way, and to make sure we do everything we can to provide security throughout the city and throughout the state.
And Governor Pataki, can you tell me the degree to which the state's planning for these sorts of tragedies, and there's obviously a plan in place, and New York is, because of its place in the world, is obviously a place you have to consider a target, whether that plan envisions something of the magnitude of what has taken place this morning?
Well, you plan for any eventuality, but you never actually expect to see something of this magnitude. But we have coordinated well with the city. We're going to continue to make sure we provide all the support we can. We do have emergency services and emergency transportation running. I know the reports have been inaccurate. We do have limited rail service out of Grand Central to the northern suburbs, limited rail service out of Brooklyn and Queens to Long Island. We're working to make sure that bus service, to the extent possible, continues, and we're trying to get subway service back on track. It's not there yet, but the coordination has been excellent. It's just in an attack of this magnitude. We just have to focus on responding and helping people at this point.
And do you have any idea how many people have been hospitalized or how many hospitals are involved, whether they extend beyond the city?
Not at this point, but every emergency service, every hospital that can provide assistance is providing assistance. The people have been just terrific in their response, and we're going to continue to make sure that response is as strong as it can be.
Governor, take a moment and tell me not as the governor necessarily, but as a resident of this state, an important player in the affairs of this state. What you thinking today?
This is an enormous tragedy. I have friends in those towers. I have friends who were there this morning that we haven't heard from. And our thoughts go to the people who are there, to their families, to all those who are suffering at this time. And we will be there to help, and we will be there to do everything we can to make sure that the support and the services necessary are provided.
Governor, thank you. Governor George Pataki joining us here. The National Guard has been activated to support New York City Police. Andrea Koppel is on board a flight with the Secretary of State. Andrea, what are you hearing from officials there?
Well, Aaron, Secretary Powell has been in Peru since last night. He was here to attend the Organization of American States General Assembly. Obviously, when he got the news of the attacks in the United States, his aides scrambled to prepare things for him to leave. We are now, as you say, on board his plane. We're about to take off from Lima to head back to Washington. While at the OAS General Assembly, Secretary Powell said it was a terrible tragedy that had fallen on all who believe in democracy, but he said that will never kill the spirit of the American people. He also said that America will bring those responsible to justice, Aaron. There was also a minute of silence at the Organization of American States, and Secretary Powell obviously had to abruptly change his plans. He was supposed to be leaving Peru later this afternoon to head on to Colombia for his first trip there, but obviously the attacks in the United States have changed that, and he's headed back to Washington. Aaron?
Andrea, give me a sense of the Secretary's demeanor. I mean, we know this is a man who has been through a lot in his life, has seen a lot in his life. Did he appear shaken to you?
I would say that Secretary Powell is someone who doesn't show his emotions in that way. This is a man with 35 years of military experience, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, former National Security Advisor himself, who's seen a lot in his day. And so I would say that obviously he appeared somber, very serious, but in terms of any other emotion, I would say that he's able to keep that very close to his chest.
Andrea, thank you. Andrea Koppel, flying back with the Secretary of State from South America. Our colleague Judy Woodruff in Washington. Judy?
Aaron, we have joining us now on the phone from the Pentagon our military affairs correspondent Jamie McIntyre. Jamie, I understand you are inside the perimeter of where the commercial jetliner came down at the Pentagon. Well, it appears that we may have lost the...
Going up towards 7th Avenue. Now, this avenue is northbound, as you can see, and traffic is pretty well gridlocked there. There's very little of it, actually. And looking over toward the Hudson River, there's very little traffic across all of Manhattan. Now, we are looking right now over the Hudson River west in Manhattan, panning around now in the skyscrapers. This is where the World Trade Center stood, and down here is the TKTS building. This is another high traffic area in Midtown, an area with which most people who have ever visited New York would be quite familiar. This is the spot where you line up for Broadway tickets, and at this time of day, just after 12 o'clock, this would normally be a sea of literally thousands of people who are working their way around, getting their lunch and that sort of thing. You're looking live now in Times Square, a scene rarely repeated. Let's get back to this camera, because I'm going to pan down this street. When you're back on this camera, Bernie, let me know. And I'm going to pan down what is Broadway Avenue, making your way down. This would eventually take you all the way down to the financial district, panning across this building and back over to 42nd Street. I want to try to give you a look down the avenue toward what is the Diamond District. This is a little tricky, as you might imagine.
It was where we saw this fireball emanate from, looked like it was almost a ground up, but it was, and I'm guessing here because I was running too hard, it was stories high and it was rolling.
What were you thinking? I mean, you're this high-powered journalist who, as you said, you've covered a lot of scary situations before, but at this point, I'm a journalist as well. I don't know. what I would have done. I don't know if I would have still been in my journalist mode or if I just would have been in my panicked citizen mode.
All you can do when something like that is happening is try to survive. That's what those firefighters were doing, and helping along the way. I mean, people were doing anything they could to help one another.
Other people, yeah.
You know, I saw police and paramedics just taking each other's hand for a moment, just checking in. You know, you're alive, I'm alive, thank God we're alive.
And then they go back to work, which is the most amazing thing.
They go back to work, and it's not just the fire, and it's not just the flames. The smoke is, when those things collapse, is as crushing as I've ever seen. It was like breathing insulation or plaster. It was fibers, and it was particles, and you could not see. And you began to wonder if this is what it's like when people can't breathe anymore because they have too much smoke.
Right. Smoke inhalation, of course. Yeah.
And so, you know, again, we cover fires, we cover bomb blasts.
But this is so much more than that. In fact, there's a report now. Senator Chuck Hagel of Nebraska compared this to Pearl Harbor. In fact, calling this a second Pearl Harbor. Being so close to it, to the enormity of what has happened here in New York as well as around this country, has it impacted you at all yet?
Yes.
I mean, San Francisco. We also have a report that Disney World in Orlando has been evacuated. Someone said to me a moment ago, before the day is over, everything's going to be shut down. And that seems to be where we're headed. CNN's Richard Roth is on the streets of New York, and he can join us now. Richard, what can you tell us?
Aaron, New Yorkers think they've seen everything, but they'll say they're amazed at what has happened. Stunned. Right now behind me, what normally would be the World Trade Center is no more. A huge cloud of white smoke. And right now it's like a war zone. Thousands of New Yorkers streaming north. The mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani, has told everyone to get north of Canal Street. We're several miles north of it. Right now, New Yorkers are trying to get out of Manhattan. There's a ferry on the west side going to New Jersey. It's really the only access out. The mayor advising that people should take the subways. We have seen dozens of emergency vehicles, hundreds, firemen being bussed in, decontamination vans coming in, call for blood donations. New Yorkers, their faces, their expressions, stunned, amazed right now. With us, several of those people who witnessed some of the carnage today. Tell us what you saw when you exited the subway station due to a lack of smoke. Eileen.
It was very smoky, and then we exited on Church Street out of the PATH train station. I crossed over to Church and Fulton, and I was trying to get a cell phone. I was trying to get up the block, and I turned around and saw this tremendous fire. I actually thought it was a bomb. I couldn't see a plane, and I saw people jumping off the building. Many people just jumping. And in a panic, I had my bag and my cell phone and everything, and I was trying to find a phone because the cell phone wasn't working. Everybody was screaming, everybody was running, the cops were trying to maintain the calm. And in that haste, people were stampeding. People started screaming that there was another plane coming. I didn't see the plane, but I turned around, and the second building just exploded. And again, all the debris was flying towards us. There was a woman on the ground with her baby. People were stampeding the baby. Myself and another man threw ourselves over the baby and pushed into the building. I got up and I just ran. And I ran towards City Hall, and then I said, oh God, why am I running there? And then I started to run towards the water. And then I was by probably Spring Street Prince Street. I was at a payphone, and I heard the rumbling. I thought it was another bomb. I thought it was another building close to me. And then I just ran from the payphone. The man is grabbing me back, telling me to stay here, you're safe. I was like, no way, I'm getting out of here, go north. And then I ran into a shoe store because I wanted to call my husband. That's all I wanted to do, was let him know I was alive, because he knew I was in the World Trade. And I got my office, and they connected me to my husband, and then we heard the second fall of the World Trade Center. And I'm astonished by the bombing. I just want to make a statement that these New York policemen and firemen, God bless them, they kept us calm. They tried so hard to keep us moving north, and it was just absolute horror. It was horror.
And when you look back there at what would be the World Trade Center?
It's devastating. I can't even look back. My 6-year-old just last week asked my husband and I to take him to the observation deck, and it's gone. And you know what? Americans will persevere, and I don't think that we'll stoop to the level of these zealot terrorist pigs. And we won't kill children, I hope, and mothers. But you know what? Whatever we have to do to eradicate the country or the world of this vermin, I just hope Bush we'll do whatever is necessary to get rid of them. And I don't know what the route or what the answer is.
All right, thank you very much. A lot of other New Yorkers here continuing the evacuation from Lower Manhattan. Back to you, Aaron.
Thank you, Richard, very much. We told you a bit ago that the border, the U.S.-Mexican border, was at a high state of alert, had been essentially closed down, shut down. We're now told that the U.S.-Canada border is also in a high state of alert. So essentially what officials are trying to do is seal off the country. So if anyone is either trying to get in or get out, it's going to be a whole lot harder to do that. But what is possible and what is imaginable, I guess, changes some on a day like this. Jerry Howard is the former head of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency here in New York, and he joins us. As you look out, what do you see?
Well, this is absolutely devastating. An incident like this will tax every bit of resource in New York City. Particularly since so many of the police officers and firefighters on the scene were injured.
Let me stop you for a second. I want to talk specifically about what you suspect is happening, but I want to go to L.A. first. Frank Buckley is in Los Angeles with us. Frank, what can you tell us about what's going on there?
Aaron, we just saw what appeared to be the worst possible situation. The last thing that we want to show you, in fact, people arriving here at the airport, apparently friends or family members of some of the victims of at least one of the flights. 3 flights were bound for Los Angeles, and they are not arriving here, obviously. Now friends and family are beginning to trickle in. We haven't seen any until this moment, 2 people just arriving here at the airport. We can tell you that just within the last 15 minutes also, this terminal they have begun a process of evacuating this terminal, and in fact all of Los Angeles airport is being evacuated now, we are told, by airport police, who we just spoke to just a few minutes ago. I'd like to let you hear from Lieutenant Howard Whitehead of the Los Angeles Airport Police as to the status here at LAX.
Because we're working with other agencies who are conducting closures outside of the airport, I can't get information right now.
3 flights were bound for Los Angeles that appear to have been involved today. What accommodations are being made for the friends and family of passengers?
That's being handled by the airlines. They're having a meeting now concerning that, so that information has to get from the airlines.
So officially, what are you starting at this point?
We're starting a total evacuation of the airport.
Will that include both workers and passengers?
Only key employees will remain at the airport.
This is the entire airport that will be evacuated?
Yes, ma'am.
Why
the
evacuation?
Because the evacuation has been ordered. I can't tell you why, but that's what that's how it stands now.
Is there a security threat to the airport?
It's precautionary at this point.
Have you ever seen anything like this before in Los Angeles?
Not to my knowledge, no.
And what is going to be your role, the police department's role in this? What are you doing?
We're protecting the public. That's what our job is.
Will roads in and out of the airport be closed as well? Will people be able to get into the airport?
Right now, this thing is fluid. We're working as we go with the changes, so I couldn't give you a definite on anything right now.
How many police officers more or less
Thanks very much.
here in the airport on a regular day?
Other agencies involved, I couldn't give you an exact figure.
Right now, there are other agencies?
Yes, ma'am. That's all I have for right now. Thank you.
What's your name?
My name is Lieutenant Whitehead.
So this is what you're
That was Lieutenant Howard Whitehead of the LAX Police telling us again that just within the last 15 or 20 minutes an order has come down, a command decision to evacuate the terminals at LAX. Up until this point, of course, flights were not being allowed in or out. Now they are evacuating all the terminals except for key personnel. Also here with me now is Lieutenant Colonel Al Van Cleef of the Salvation Army. You have the very difficult task of helping to coordinate the grief counseling. Can you tell me about the accommodations that are being made for family members of Flight 11, 77, and 175?
We have 6 involved in this attack on our country. Back to you guys.
All right, Marcia, thank you. That's interesting. Earlier today, Reuters had reported that that report out of Abu Dhabi, that particular group Marcia mentioned, was taking responsibility. That group then denied responsibility about an hour ago. This must be an update from that point. Again, now taking responsibility. But most terrorism experts are still pointing the finger at Osama bin Laden. Right. Again, in some fashion, he's been considered to be weakened somewhat, and his organization weakened somewhat. But we want to point out again, a report out of London 3 weeks ago, Osama bin Laden promising an unprecedented attack on U.S. interests because of U.S. support for the nation of Israel.
And we know he has the money to make something like this happen. That's what the man has, is a lot of money, and he has access to a network of small terrorist groups around the world. So he's obviously, possibly, put all of that in motion today.
I want to point out to you now that, again, these are just the preliminary reports. The first death actually confirmed at 11:15 this morning. Bellevue Hospital now reporting 38 dead, including 4 police officers, 3 firefighters, and a pregnant woman. Again, 38 reported dead, as well as, how many, is that 8 children as well? And 8 children as well, is that correct?
Michael?
Again, 38 dead. We're afraid that death toll will rise much, much higher. There are some reports from New York City police officers who will remain nameless. They expect this to go into the thousands as far as the death toll here in New York City.
Let's go ahead and recap for you, if you're just joining us, what happened today. Todd and I will give you this recap here. At around 9 o'clock this morning, the first plane that was an American Airlines flight from Boston heading to Los Angeles crashed into the World Trade Center, one of the towers there. About 18 minutes later, a second plane crashed into the second tower of the World Trade Center there. Next, an aircraft crashes near the Pentagon outside of Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia. That was about an hour after the attacks here at the World Trade Center.
The government buildings in Washington, including the Capitol and the White House, were evacuated after that, with officials citing a credible threat of a terrorist attack. Again, that was much earlier this morning, shortly after 9 o'clock. The Federal Aviation Administration shut down all aircraft takeoffs nationwide. If planes were in the air, they were ordered to land immediately. I want to point out now we have an urgent call from the Red Cross, a need for blood. Anyone who could donate blood should go to any hospital and do so at this time. Again, we do not know how many are injured, how many may be in need of blood desperately in surgery. If you can donate blood, please go to a hospital and do so. I want to go to Lou Young now, if I could, down at 100 Center Street. If we can get Lou on the line there. He is in front of a camera. Lou.
Yeah, we're here at 100 Center Street, a area just north of the collapse area, and what we're seeing, as you're talking about the reasons behind this, is a dramatic triage and rescue attempt for the survivors still trapped in the wreckage. On Duane Street, a long line of vehicles queuing up to get in there to suppress some of the dust, and then the ambulances, a steady stream of them coming north out of the area, carrying, we presume, wounded people inside. Down in that area, in the collapse zone, the ground is like after a volcanic eruption, a thick cushion of powder drifting like snow in some places. We also have some videotape that was taken about 10 o'clock, just as that World Trade Center number 2 collapsed. You're seeing it now. Amy Stone, our reporter, and Barry Weiss and Dan Bartolucci were there right as the tower collapsed. And this is what it looked like on the ground as the entire area began to fill with dust. People who were not trapped by the wreckage immediately were choked by the lack of oxygen, by the dust that filled the air, and a lot of people required oxygen. People are getting oxygen on the street here, and Amy Stone is with me now. She lived through this. You literally ran for your life, didn't you?
Basically, a lot of people were standing around just watching the awesome look of the World Trade Center on fire. So we were all standing around shooting it. Everybody could just mouths open, and all of a sudden you heard this big, it sounded like another explosion. It was the first building collapsing. We have a picture of it, and you can see the building collapse, and then all of a sudden it just became a big cloud of smoke, and everybody started running, and we started running, and everybody was running, and you were like being chased by a big cloud of smoke, getting darker and darker and closer and closer. And my cameraman was engulfed in it. He's doing okay, for his wife who's watching. But you were just engulfed in this enormous amount of ashes and clouds. You mentioned volcano, and I imagine that's what it was.
There was a short lull in between the collapses where people were able to move around down close to the collapse scene. They began to crowd in again, and again, police officers were saying, the second tower is going to collapse. People began to run. We thought it was just panic. I remember looking up, seeing the second tower, the gaping hole and the flame coming out of it, and I started down Duane Street looking for the crew, and the ground began to rumble, just like one of the earthquakes we experienced when we were out in LA a couple of years back. And we ran for a door jam, and the entire ground shook. And again, the cloud of dust came again. Now, it was very, very difficult. People crying, people unable to believe that this has happened.
And people running into buildings to try and get away from the smoke, too. And then they were trapped in the building. They weren't letting people out of the building because they didn't want people just around. They wanted to clear the streets off for the emergency vehicles. So a lot of people, they just kept in the building for a while.
So they are beginning to give people oxygen on the street, and they're asking people. If you look behind me here, this is Federal Plaza, and the blast zone is just behind that area back there. They're trying to get people out of this this area where they're congregating. Many people went to that fountain over there in front of the Federal building to wash the dust off them, the choking dust. Many of them had shirts and handkerchiefs over their mouths and were very traumatized by what they've been through.
Right behind you, there's a portable oxygen
let's take a look at
tank
that
over
Dan.
there, and a lot of people getting oxygen from whether it's been the run that it took getting away from that big blob of smoke, and a lot of old people also that just weren't able to run.
Now, a few moments ago, the buildings commissioner for the city of New York, Bill Diamond, came by. He said that the mayor called him immediately after the first plane impacted on the World Trade Center and ordered the closure of all city buildings. All state buildings south of Canal also closed. Literally, the entire city south of Canal Street is being closed down and evacuated. People are being told just get out, walk north, because you can't cross the rivers and you can't take the subway. Just get out and walk. We have seen people walking out of here that were obviously wounded. One woman with her feet bandaged, her hands bloody, refusing medical help, knowing that so many other people still trapped needed much more seriously, much more urgently than her. Let's take a look around here.
The engine. We also saw the engine. We were at, where were we? We were at Vesey and Park Place, and you could see an engine from one of the planes, and I believe we have footage of that. It was an engine, and I believe what is it,
an aircraft engine you're talking about.
An aircraft engine, and also a building right down from the World Trade Center, a chunk of that building. Obviously, the engine hit it on its way down, so that was all cordoned off, and they were afraid of more flying debris, so they were getting people out of that area. But we do have a shot of the engine just there, who took out a street sign and just wasn't on fire or anything, but it's an incredible sight to see.
There are a lot of federal investigators down here. We saw our first National Guardsman, New York National Guardsman, on the street here directing traffic a few moments ago. He has since moved on. Lots of corrections officers on the street, people standing by, waiting to see what they can do to help. A lot of the cars and vehicles that are coming out of the blast zone come out trailing dust from the tremendous amount of debris and dust that came off these two landmark structures as they simply collapsed. It's difficult to realize that our skyline has completely changed today. Here you see a live picture of people streaming south. It looks like looks like the FDR on several levels there. They are moving south, just trying to get north, away from the part of our city that has come under attack.
That's the Manhattan Bridge you're looking at, Lou.
Some people were speaking out loud here, wondering if this is almost like Pearl Harbor Day. It certainly feels that way on the streets here. You can't quite fathom what has happened and how many people may have lost their lives under the debris.
All right, Lou, thank you so much.
We're wrapping it up here for the moment, sending it back to the information center. We're live in Lower Manhattan. Lou Young.
Okay, and the shot you're actually seeing in the right corner there, the shot that says live, that's people streaming across the Manhattan Bridge.
Again, people leaving in droves, getting away from buildings, getting away from the area. Interestingly enough, Lou Young, making a reference to Pearl Harbor, Senator Chuck Hagel of Nebraska calling this today a second Pearl Harbor. A quote I want to read to you again from Chris Yates, an aviation expert at Jane's Transport magazine. This is perhaps, and I would add, is definitely the most audacious terrorist attack that has ever taken place in the world. It takes a logistics operation from the terror group involved that is second to none. Only a small handful of terror groups is on that list. Yates says the top of that list is Osama bin Laden. As you heard Marsha Kramer say moments ago, there is another terrorist group claiming responsibility. You may see many take responsibility for this attack. They are celebrating on the West Bank today, celebrating in the streets, even as Yasser Arafat says he's horrified by what's happened. They're celebrating this attack on U.S. interests here on our soil.
And just want to reiterate, Marsha also said 2 warships have been ordered to come into New York Harbor to help protect us. More protection for us. Michael O'Looney, do you have an update for us?
This is more to do with mass transit. People apparently trying to leave the city, as they should today. Ferry service has been suspended. We're told the
debriefing on Capitol Hill, and that Moran says that what they know about that plane crash near Pittsburgh was they believe that was related to an attempted attack on Camp David. Of course, you know, where there was an earlier incorrect report that Camp David had in fact been attacked. All officials now are saying that is not the case. So we have a little bit more from what the intelligence community is apparently telling members of Congress. It appears also that fighter jets are now escorting Air Force One, which would be a standard precaution under a circumstance like this. The last time I can recall, in my own experience, this happening was when President Bush I flew down to a drug summit in the nation of Colombia, where, of course, terrorism is a constant threat. We're waiting, as we noted, for further word from the White House, where communications are obviously a problem because everybody's been evacuated as to where and when the president will land. So that is basically the latest we have from here. I might call your attention to a quote. This from Chris Yates, an aviation expert at Jane's Transport in London. Jane's, of course, is a company that publishes a number of defense-related and aviation and maritime-related publications, military-related publications. He called it the most audacious terrorist attack ever taken place in the world. There you go.
That cannot be
Rita
over.
Cosby, by the way, has something to report as well. Rita's been staying in touch with us by telephone. She's in our air. Rita, what do you know?
Well, Britt, I'm told by the FAA that at this point 22 international flights have been diverted to Canada, and there are 50 flights over the United States. Remember, we're in a full-fledged ground stop right now. This is the first time in U.S. history that they have done such a ground stop, but we are told that there are 50 flights still in the air trying to reach their locations here in the United States, ordered to land immediately. There are also 2 international flights from Europe in which the pilots have not responded, and that is drawing concern from U.S. These are flights that were en route to the United States from Europe, and the pilots have not responded to the FAA, so they're trying to find out if those 2 planes may be in trouble. Also, law enforcement sources are telling us, and this is interesting, that there was word put out through an Arab newspaper about 3 weeks ago that bin Laden himself, the mastermind behind the East African bombings, the embassy bombings there in East Africa, that he apparently did put out word about 3 weeks ago saying that he was planning an unprecedented attack against U.S. interests. Since that time, they got other information that there may be some sort of attack against U.S. possibly governmental facilities. And then, as we know, on Friday, the State Department did put out a worldwide caution basically telling U.S. Citizens and also particularly government and military officials that they should be in a heightened state of alert. But I will tell you from talking to law enforcement sources, I talked to them minutes after the 2 planes rammed into the World Trade Center building this morning, the Twin Towers, that they were very stunned, that they said, look, we had gotten word that there may be some sort of attack, but we had no idea it was going to be on U.S. soil, no idea that it was going to involve airliners and so forth. I will tell you also, law enforcement sources do know that Osama bin Laden, right now they believe he's sort of the prime suspect. They have no idea who's behind this, but they are looking at him because they do say that he and his men did a lot of training. In fact, where they did practice hijackings, where they did have pilots who were on their staff, and in fact, we had reported earlier that 3 people involved in the East African bombings were actually pilots, and that's sort of part of their training, and they get some of that in Afghanistan, also Iran, and a number of other countries. So this is sort of part of their training to prepare for something like this. But law enforcement sources are telling me, and these are intelligence officials, that they were really stunned by today's development.
All right, Rita, thank you very much. It's worth perhaps also adding to this, John Scott, that the North American Air Defense Command, NORAD, is controlling the U.S. aircraft that are in the air, including those that are escorting Air Force One. So you get an idea from that just how seriously this threat is being taken by the U.S. military. Back to you in New York, John Scott.
All right, Britt Hume, thanks very much. This was supposed to be an election day in New York. Primary elections were scheduled for mayor here and other offices. Those elections have been canceled. A couple of other more mundane matters considering all that's gone on. Major League Baseball has canceled its scheduled games for tonight. All those games are canceled. Let's listen to one of the witnesses from Lower Manhattan now recount what he saw. This is unedited tape.
With you, Senator, you've been briefed by what authorities?
Well, I'm on both the Judiciary Committee and also the Intelligence Committee, and I've been briefed by the highest levels of the FBI and of the intelligence community. And I just have to say our thoughts and prayers go out to the victims of this terrible tragedy caused by a bunch of cowards. And there's no justification for what these cowards have done to purely innocent Americans, but I do have some information.
Senator Hatch, this is Wolf Blitzer. Tell us, I spoke with you earlier on the telephone, but tell us precisely what you are now being told in these high-level briefings about those who may, and repeat the word may, have been responsible for these attacks.
You're right. They've come to the conclusion that this looks like the signature of Osama bin Laden and that he may be the one behind this. I think most authorities agree that this is something that we doubt seriously if Iran, Iraq, or Libya would try and do, because they know of the massive response that we'd have to bring down on them. But there was no advance notice at all. They had no way of knowing that this was going to happen. It was carefully planned. And what it means is it seems to me that if that turns out to be true, we're going to have to revitalize Shah Massoud and the other people in Afghanistan who basically are fighting to get rid of this type of terrorism. And I think we're going to have to ask our friends in Pakistan to get, in turn, to be more cooperative than they have in the past. And then we'd have to work with our allies to have an international strategy to combat this type of international jihad against the West.
We're listening to Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah. We also have joining us on the telephone Senator John McCain from his home in Arizona. Senator McCain, I assume you've been talking to authorities as well.
Yes, Judy, and I'm on Capitol Hill in Washington.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks for clarifying.
Yes. The situation is so serious that words don't describe it. I think that it's clear that the organization and magnitude of the attacks required more than a few people to perpetrate it, and it'll take some time to determine who they are and who supported these attacks, but I think we'll find them out, and they will suffer the full measure of our justice. This is obviously an act of war that's been committed on the United States of America.
What do you mean, obviously, an act of war, Senator McCain?
These attacks clearly constitute an act of war. The unwarranted, unprovoked attacks against innocent American citizens is clearly an act of war, and one that requires that kind of national response and international response.
Senator Orrin Hatch, I believe, is also still with us, Senator. And Senator Hatch, you mentioned the bin Laden organization. Former NATO head General Wesley Clark also said to us about an hour ago in an interview that he believes that it's only the bin Laden organization that is capable of carrying out attacks this coordinated and on this massive a scale. What are you basing your information on?
Well, keep in mind, there are nations that also could carry out these attacks, but I don't think would dare do that, knowing that their signature is going to be figured out. We're going to find out who did this, and we're going after the bastards. It's that simple. And I just have to say that both the FBI and our intelligence community believe that this is a bin Laden signature. And I believe it is. I was the first to point out bin Laden to the Clinton administration and said they're going to kill Americans, and we've got to get on top of that. And I think we're going to have to get on top of it, because this is a cowardly bunch who will stop at nothing to, like you say, have a jihad or a war against the United States, and to do it in the most cowardly fashion.
But Senator McCain, I mean, there will be those who are saying the United States was taking all reasonable precautions. We have security at airports, metal detectors, and so forth and so on. How much more is going to have to be done to prevent something like these things from happening again?
Judy, I don't think our lifestyles will be the same for a long time, since it was before these attacks, as far as use of transportation, particularly airports, are concerned. There have been warnings about whether our security was good enough and whether the proper measures were being taken. I'm sure that'll all be reviewed. By the way, I have no information as to who caused this, and I hesitate to speculate, but I am confident that the President of the United States will lead us, and we will find out who has carried out these acts. And I think it's a little premature to make that determination until we have the hard facts, but I'm sure that we'll get them. The other aspect of this is that it may highlight over time the need for more human intelligence. We have very good technical intelligence capabilities, satellites, etc., but for many years, we haven't had the kind of human intelligence which determines motivations before actions are taken.
I'm going to interrupt you, Senator McCain. These are the first pictures we have in. This is from Somerset County, Pennsylvania. This is where the United Airlines flight, I believe it is 176, went down. I'm sorry, I'm correcting. United Airlines 93. This was a Boeing 757 bound from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco. It crashed in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, near the town of Shanksville, south of Pittsburgh. We're told about 80 miles outside of Pittsburgh in western Pennsylvania. It is not known how many passengers or crew were on board, although initial reports indicated no survivors. Again, these are the first pictures we have coming in from WTAJ there in the Pittsburgh area. United Airlines telling us earlier they had lost this flight, and they knew that it had crashed near Pittsburgh. There is a second United Airlines flight, the Boeing 767 Flight 175, bound from Boston to Los Angeles, has crashed. The airline's still telling us at this point that they do not know where. We don't have information on the number of people aboard. It is possible, but not confirmed, that this would have been the second plane to hit the World Trade Center. Now again, 2 United Airlines flights, and in addition to American Airlines flights, the Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles. This was a Boeing 767 with 81 passengers on board, 9 crew members, 2 pilots. This is believed to be one of the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center. All 4 of these planes that we're describing to you now, these flights, all headed to California. The second American Airlines Flight 77, this is a Boeing 757, left Dulles Airport near Washington on its way to Los Angeles. It had 58 passengers on board, 4 crew, 2 pilots. This plane unaccounted for. However, a commercial jet was seen crashing into the Pentagon a few hours ago, and it is believed that this could have been the one, but again, not confirmed. So 2 commercial airliners, American Airlines, 2 United Airlines. And I would just add at this point, because to be reassuring to some extent to those of you who are watching, we've been reporting that all flights within the United States have been canceled. There's been a complete hold down on all commercial travel. However, there were planes that were already in the air when these terrible incidents took place this morning. And as of a few moments ago, the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, was reporting that there were still 50 aircraft in the skies. Now, some of those may have landed in the last few minutes, but that was the information as of a few minutes ago. All of them were said to be within 50 or so miles of their destination. Now, I'm getting new information in my ear. Now, reporting our congressional correspondent Kate Snow, you're looking at a picture of the Pentagon Live. There's still smoke billowing out of our military command center in the United States. As we look at these pictures, I'm going to turn it over right now to our congressional correspondent Kate Snow, who has with her 2 members of Congress. Kate?
Judy, it's been a bit difficult to get in touch with members of Congress. As we've been reporting, the Capitol has been shut down. You can see it behind me here. You can see that everything's fine there, but it is in a state of lockdown. They've evacuated the Capitol. Joining me here on the roof of a church, I might add, we've managed to get up on the roof here to get a vantage point, is Congressman Curt Weldon, a Republican from Pennsylvania, around the Philadelphia area, not exactly where that...
Hearing reports early on that one of those doomed flights originated at Newark. Can you confirm that for us?
Yes, that is the case. I'm going to just take the earpiece out of my ear because I'm hearing an echo. It's a little bit confusing. That is, in fact, the case. Flight 93 from Newark bound for San Francisco crashed around 10:30 this morning in western Pennsylvania around Pittsburgh, and we're not exactly sure how it...
There were rumors here for a good 2 hours that there were potentially planes headed this direction.
Now we're in total lockdown, as you said, and members are basically scattered around the city, but we're going to get back to work because we're going to convince these cowards that America doesn't back down, that our government will continue to operate. in
You think
spite of these terrorist activities.
You said we're at war.
We're at war. We're absolutely at war. This is 21st century war. These are the kinds of activities that we expect from cowards and terrorist groups.
I need to go back to Judy Woodruff now in Washington. Judy.
All right, Kate, thank you. And I want to tell our viewers that we do know now that President Bush has landed near Shreveport, Louisiana, at Barksdale Air Force Base. We're told that he is talking to reporters. There may be a statement from the president from the White House there on the ground. And one other item here from Washington before I turn it back over to Aaron Brown. In New York, 34 Pentagon victims at least being treated at 3 Washington hospitals. No word on fatalities. Aaron?
Judy, in the area, I guess, of practical information, and we talked to the mayor about this a little bit ago, there is now in New York and in northern New Jersey a critical shortage of blood, a desperate need for blood. We would remind people that giving blood is perfectly safe and on a day like today, absolutely necessary. And so if that's something you can do to help out in the midst of this extraordinary tragedy, you might consider doing that. On the phone with us, James Sanders, who's with Bellevue Hospital, one of the major hospitals here in New York. Mr. Sanders, what can you tell us about the situation there?
Hi, it's Hillary Lane reporting that Mr. Sanders was called back into the command center, but I can fill you in on the briefing that he just gave us. This is the largest emergency and trauma unit in New York City and the second largest emergency unit in the country. They say they are underutilized right now, while the hospitals downtown closer to the Trade Center are absolutely overwhelmed. So they have put out a call to EMS saying, bring people in here. It is an emergency call. What I have seen at this point are some patients staggering and being helped in, nobody in apparently critical condition. The hospital tells us that they've had 65 minor injuries. Those are broken bones, internal injuries, smoke inhalation cases. There have been 10 major injuries.
Hillary, I need to interrupt you.
One person brought in.
Hillary, I need to interrupt you. This is a Taliban spokesman talking now in Kabul, I believe. This is coming to us by video phone from Afghanistan. And I am not hearing, and perhaps you guys are, but I am not hearing him.
We should remind our viewers that Afghanistan was one of the sites that was hit 3 years ago by the United States.
The Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan has already explicitly said its standpoint or its position about terrorism.
The terrorism ټول انواع او ډولونه لکه څنګه چې په افغانستان کې هم ورانې پیش کړي دي او دلته موږ همیشه د تروریزم ښکار شوي یو دلته مو غندلې دي او په نړیوال سطح باندې هم د دې غندنه کوو.
We have criticized all forms of criticism as Afghanistan has itself faced and has become the victim of terrorism, and we even now criticize these kind of acts.
Terrorism یو ویرونکې داراچونکې او نفرت پېښونکې لاره ده.
Terrorism is a terrifying and hateful hatred or hateful method.
او دغه پیښه چې سوي د بشري پلوه خورا پراخه او لوی ناورین دی.
And this incident is from the humanitarian point of view surely a very vast and very terrifying incident.
Any question?
Any question?
Question, please. Have you received any kind of information, any kind of communication from the United States or any other organization?
The American متحدة ایالات یا د بلوچستان کوم رابطه بشته او دا پالیسي کار هم کوي اثر یې کړی دی که دې خبره ده.
Suspicions obviously turn to Osama bin Laden. In the media he's been mentioned as possibly having a hand in this. Are you concerned that Afghanistan could be on the receiving end of
recriminations of reprisals of responded acts. توجه یا ګمان ته راوړي مطبوعاتو یا میډیا د منهم اخیسته ده آیا تاسو څه توقع کوئ چې افغانستان د دې عکس العمل وویني یا د عکس العمل هدف وګرځي؟ زه فکر کوم چې دغه نوم اخیستی هم یوازې به د پخوا څخه چې چون په هغه تفسیرو کې ډېر نوم راځي خلا مخرڅوي. I think that even if someone has taken his name in the media, it might be just because his name was repeatedly mentioned in the past in the comments. Just for this reason, his name might have been repeated.
Just the second half of the question, though, are you concerned that Afghanistan could receive reprised attacks?
We don't see or foresee any difficulty in this regard because there is no argument or no reason for it.
If it were to happen, if there were to be attacks, what would the implications be of such a situation?
If there were attacks from...
As Jonathan said, if there were to be reprisals against Afghanistan, what would the implications of that be?
هغه به دغه وخت وګورو خو ما مخکې ویل چې ټول انواع د تروریزم هغه په دولتي شکل باندې که چېرته یو هیواد بل هیواد ولید طبعا هغه دولتي تروریزم.
It is a little bit earlier to say at this stage, but as we said that we criticize all forms of criticism. So if Afghanistan is attacked, then we can call it state terrorism.
There's also been concerns because allegations that there's maybe an Arab connection to these acts of terrorism have also been raised. Can you talk to those concerns? Can you rule out any Arab links?
Afghanistan ki Arabi atba ya bazı dasi grupuna چې له دنیا خطر احساسوي تاسو دی.
No mistake, said the president. The United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. The president said the U.S. military has been put on a high alert status and said he had taken security precautions to ensure the government continues to function. And as we said, the president at this moment is not going back to Washington. He has been taken elsewhere for his own safety. There is no reason, by the way, at this point to believe there are continuing threats, but that doesn't mean there aren't any, and the Secret Service is taking no chances, and we can't recall anything even approaching that. We also have a report coming out of London from the Associated Press that followers of Osama bin Laden had warned 3 weeks ago that they would carry out a huge and unprecedented attack on U.S. interests. That according to a London-based Arab journalist. He adds they said it would be huge and unprecedented, but did not specify what it was, and we will not assume that this is what it was, but obviously a lot of people are wondering. Joining us on the phone, Richard Holbrooke, former American ambassador to the United Nations, Robert Gates, former head of the CIA, and they join us. Mr. Gates,